Hello, everyone. Welcome. I am delighted to introduce Dr. Sukrit Venkatagiri, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Computer Science, and also a faculty affiliate at the Healthy, Equitable, and Responsive Democracy, or HERD, Research Institute. His teaching and research takes an interdisciplinary perspective, looking at the intersection of social computing, how computational systems mediate social interaction, and the human factors involved in security and privacy online. At Swarthmore, he directs the Collective Resilience Lab, where, along with 8 student collaborators, he helps people to do 3 things. 1, resist technologically mediated harm, ranging from strategic misinformation and hate speech to privacy violations online. 2, build socio-technical systems to repair trust in each other and our institutions. And 3, empower people to advocate for their rights while refusing harmful data and labor practices. His research has been published in top-tier computer science and human-computer interaction venues, and has also been featured in or cited by the New York Times, the Washington Post, Reuters, Inside Higher Ed, among others. His research at Swarthmore is supported by a National Science Foundation grant for early career faculty and a Google Award for Inclusion Research, as well as a generous support from the Lang Center for Civic and Social Responsibility. Previously, he was a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Washington's Center for an Informed Public, where he worked on the Election Integrity Partnership, a joint collaboration between UW and Stanford, to identify election-related misinformation during the 2022 US elections. He received a PhD and master's in computer science from Virginia Tech and has worked at Meta and Microsoft Research. When he's not teaching or working with students on research, you can find him biking the Schuylkill River or fending off squirrel attacks on his garden in Philadelphia. You're not here to listen to me, you're here to listen to him, so please join me in welcoming Sukrit.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. How are you all doing? Good? Great. I'm so excited to be here. If there's one thing I want you to take away from my talk today, is that we should all become Luddites and stop using generative AI. Before I continue, I asked a dear friend to record a message for all of you.
Hi, folks. Good morning. I hope Garnet Day is going well. This is your former President, Barack Obama, calling in. I wish I could be there at Swarthmore College to attend my dear friend Sukrit's talk today on how generative AI is reshaping society. Unfortunately, I have got to go save democracy. Peace. Bye.
So just a few years ago, creating an audio deepfake like that would have taken hours, if not days. I did this in 2 minutes, not even on my own computer. I did this on a website. So what if I had gotten Donald Trump or Kamala Harris to say something more nefarious and posted it on social media as an October surprise? So today I'm going to talk to you about how generative AI is impacting nearly every aspect of society today and what we can do about it. We have 3 options. We can fight, we could freeze, or we could fly. But let me talk a little bit about its impact today and what I'm not going to talk about. So while generative AI has had a huge environmental impact, our land is being stripped for minerals, AI data centers are consuming enormous amounts of power and water. Just last year, a query to ChatGPT one single query, by the way, consumed as much water as there is in a single bottle of water. In fact, AI consumes so much power that Microsoft has signed a deal with the operators of 3 Mile Island to reopen a nuclear reactor just for their data centers. And I think one reactor powers as much as, 40,000 homes, or maybe I'm off by an order of magnitude, either 4,000 or 400,000, but in either case, it's a lot of power. Today, I'm not going to focus on generative AI's environmental impact. I'm going to focus on its social impact. And when I talk about generative AI, I'm not referring to large language models that can generate vast amounts of seemingly convincing text. So convincing that last week, a teenager committed suicide because of his interactions with a large language model over several months. The large language model would sort of continue to ask questions about this teenager's desire to end his life. It did not refer him to any outside sources, did not stop talking to him about his issues that he was facing, and unfortunately it led to him ending his life. Doctors too are passing sensitive medical information into publicly available models online. So your interactions with a doctor might end up in Microsoft servers somewhere in Seattle or Brazil or halfway around the world. And so doctors are using this without any understanding of how these chatbots work, the fact that they can't reason, and they can only provide seemingly convincing or plausible answers to questions with no basis in fact. But today, when I refer to generative AI, I'm referring to multimodal models that can create photos, video, and audio, which I call deepfakes. For example, in August, Donald Trump posted several AI-generated images of Taylor Swift and her fans, seemingly, having Taylor Swift endorse Donald Trump for president. But Swift never endorsed Donald Trump. The image was a deepfake. But this troubled her so deeply that she instead ended up endorsing Kamala Harris. And in fact, on her Instagram post, her 280 million followers, she linked to vote.org. And there were 500,000, nearly 500,000 attributable visits to vote.org because of her single post on Instagram, because of a post that Donald Trump created. And her Instagram post can be linked to 30,000 attributable signups for people to register to vote. So there are three types of generative AI models that are used to create deepfakes. The first is a text-to-image model. So given a prompt, say, create an image of the Pope wearing a white puffer jacket, the AI model, having seen hundreds, maybe thousands of images of popes and of puffer jackets, puts the two together and creates an image like this. Another popular technique is face swapping. So you have someone's face here on the left, and we have a video of Ryan Gosling on the right, and you can blend their faces together just enough to get the face in the video to look like the image on the left.
The idea for the film came because I had an opportunity to work in Detroit, and I'm from Canada.
Finally, there are models that, given a single image of a person and some text or audio, they can generate a lifelike video of the person talking. So they're uploading the audio
But
here.
you know what I decided to do? I decided to focus all my attention, all my time on listening. So instead of doing something else, I just listened, and listened. Because I'm a true believer that if you're really bad at something like listening, for example, it only shows you that, hey, you have to practice listening as much as you can.
We introduced VASA, a framework for generating lifelike talking faces with appealing visual effective skills, given a single static image and a speech audio clip.
So this is Microsoft's VASA 1 model that they previewed in April. Thankfully, it's not publicly available yet. There are different approaches to creating generative AI and the models. Each one of these techniques is implemented slightly differently, but often rely on the same underlying principle, which is a generative adversarial network, or GAN for short. GANs consist of two main components. The first is called a discriminator. What it does is it learns or develops an understanding or representation of what a real image might look like. You could think of it like a detective whose sole goal is to identify forgeries. The second component is a generator. A generator is sort of like an art forger. The generator's goal is to create forgeries so good that the detective can't detect them. One thing to note, though, is that the generator doesn't actually know what a real image looks like. Instead, it starts out with noise. And using this noise, it tests some input image into the discriminator, maybe a horrible, horrible forgery. And the discriminator here is, this forgery is no match for the discriminator. It easily detects the forgery. And in this interaction between the generator and the discriminator, both learn something from this interaction. So this data is fed back, the fact that this forgery did not work. This time, the generator goes back to the drawing board and comes up with a much better image. But here, again, the forgery is detected by the discriminator, and they both learn from this interaction. This happens over and over, tens, if not hundreds or thousands of times, until finally the generator is able to create a forgery that is good enough that it passes or gets past the discriminator. So now we finally have, this is an image and it ended up getting past the discriminator. The discriminator doesn't know better. Okay, that was an image, it was a real image. I don't really know what's wrong with it. But the generator is now excited. It knows that it got past the discriminator and now can create more images like this one with slight variations. So we finally have, again, our generative adversarial network that can create seemingly real images. So this is a bit about how it works, and we'll come back to this at the end of my talk. But I told you, that generative AI is reshaping society. How exactly is it reshaping society? Well, maybe the next time Taylor Swift breaks up with her boyfriend, she not only is going to write a song about him, but maybe she's going to erase him from existence, at least from every photo of them together. So I did this with 2 clicks in Photoshop. Maybe 2 or 3 years ago with Photoshop, it would have taken me an hour to do this, right? But image manipulation is nothing new. We've been manipulating images for as long as images themselves have existed. Stalin didn't have Photoshop. He had skilled photographers who could manipulate the negatives. And so they would carefully paint over the negatives and re-image that. And you would end up with an image where he never interacted with someone who was part of his cabinet. People he once considered allies never even existed, as if he never knew them. So image manipulation is not new, but generative AI can only make things easier. If you can change an image, you can change history. And if you can change history, you can influence the future. The underlying concept here is that there's power in visual imagery, and the question is who has control over what you depict. So what can we do about it? Well, we could freeze and do nothing. What happens if we freeze? Well, this summer I worked with 3 students here at SWAT to figure out what would happen if we did nothing. So extrapolating what's going on, how are people using generative AI to cause harm? We looked at 500 different news reports published over the last 2 years across 54 countries, and we found areas where generative AI was being used to cause harm. And we found that harm was present across every single sphere of life, from non-consensual intimate imagery and child sexual abuse material to politics, to being used in scams, extortion, fraud, in art and entertainment, health, religion, sports, and more. So here's a graph that we created just based on the data we collected. So from 2022 to 2024, the number of reported incidents of deepfakes causing harm has gone up 4-fold. This is just the number of reported incidents, something that a journalist thought was newsworthy, right? We don't know how much of the harm has gone unreported, especially for cases of intimate partner violence, for example. So in terms of non-consensual intimate imagery, generative AI is being used by teenagers to bully each other in schools. So they're creating nude images of their classmates that are not real. Politicians and journalists have had videos depicting them engaged in obscene acts that they never engaged in. For example, AOC is someone who is a frequent victim. Pedophiles are also using open source AI models to create sexual abuse content. In politics, I've seen a lot of use cases as well. So here is one recent example. Elon Musk in July, he tweeted a video that someone created. The video itself is real. It's clipped together from a real campaign ad, but the audio is actually a deepfake. It manipulates Kamala Harris's voice. So let's see what Kamala Harris says in this ad that Elon Musk shared.
I may not know the first thing about running the country, but remember, that's a good thing if you're a deep state puppet. I had 4 years under the tutelage of the ultimate deep state puppet, a wonderful mentor, Joe Biden.
So it's hard to see with this projection, but this video, the single video that Elon Musk shared, got 136 million views. In Pakistan, their former prime minister used generative AI from behind jail to create a video where he claimed victory for his party in the recent election. So he passed along notes to his lawyer, who then worked with someone who has technical expertise to train an AI model on previous speeches he's given to create a new speech that he never gave. On the bottom left, we have an image of Donald Trump getting arrested, although he never got arrested like this, right? This is an image that a journalist created for humor and satire, but out of context, it could be dangerous. Do folks remember when the Pentagon was bombed? Anyone here? Yeah? This never happened. So, this is an image from 2023, and this is a deepfake. Even though it's not real, it had very real impacts. That day, there was a sharp drop in the stock market, and almost $500 billion was momentarily wiped out from value in the stock market. Thankfully, it was just a blip. People caught it in time, and the stock market recovered, but it's hard to tell what would happen in the future. Generative AI is also being used to scam people, to extort people, and to defraud people. A couple in Canada was reportedly scammed of $21,000 after getting an emergency phone call from their son asking for money. I created the video I'm going to show you next, again online, and it took 30 seconds, about 5 seconds for me to write the prompt, and 25 seconds for it to generate. So here's Mark Zuckerberg.
So please help me. I'm a billionaire and I don't ever want to pay taxes.
I'm going to play that again.
Help me, Priscilla, please help me. I'm a billionaire and I don't ever want to pay taxes.
So this is Mark Zuckerberg in distress, and I created that in 5 seconds. A finance worker in Hong Kong joined a Zoom call with his boss and his colleagues, and he wired $25 million. Turns out he did not wire the money to the right place. He wired it to a scammer. And it was a Zoom call where people had created a real-time deepfake. So the other person on the other end is talking to you. They look like the person you work with, but they are not the person you work with. But none of these harms are unique to the 2020s. Generative AI mostly exacerbates existing social problems. One maybe positive use case might be in art and entertainment. So I'm going to play an excerpt from a video that was posted online. Maybe you'll recognize some of the people in this video.
Stay with me, buddy.
What the hell were you doing in there, asshole? I said we needed to be quick, and you start talking some bullshit of I cannot join until I be resolved, our great valiant has become. What the hell was that?
My dear, it's William Shakespeare.
It went on for 14 minutes. How many times have I told you? No monologues, man.
That rather nailed it.
You got shot, and we got the cops up our ass.
Speak thou for me. Tell them what I've done.
That's actually pretty good.
Yeah, he nailed that, to be fair.
So do we recognize some of the people here? Can you tell me some of their names? Miley Cyrus. Who else? And Barack Obama. So pardon Miley's French, but I thought this was a really good example of what you could do with generative AI. But here too, it's interesting, right? Like people, someone wanted to create this for comedy. Great, I understand that. But you also didn't want to pay Miley Cyrus to act in a video, so you just used photos of her instead to create a video of her doing something. She never did, she never consented to. So generative AI is reshaping our society. Sometimes in entertaining ways, but this is a bleak future that I painted for you. The ability to create highly realistic, visually compelling images, audio, and video is accelerating. These advances aren't coming in years or months, they're coming in weeks. A lot of this, is possible on your average laptop. You can do this in minutes. And so we have two options here. We can't freeze. We can't let this continue to go on. We could fly. Where would we go to? We can't escape society unless you want to become a hermit. So our only option then that we're left with is to fight. So this summer with two students, we wanted to understand what everyday people like you, thought we should do about deepfakes. We spoke to people with and without computer science expertise. We spoke to people with and without college degrees, or were expecting to have college degrees. There was a wide range in what people wished would happen with generative AI and how we could reshape the way it's currently being used and implemented. So remember this figure? I told you we were going to come back to it. Well, we're coming back to it. This is a figure of a generative adversarial network on the left. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in a box with a few other components, and I'm going to call it a generative AI model. So we have a couple solutions to address the problem that generative AI models are creating. We could poison the well. Remember, we need real images to create a seemingly real image. So we could use images that maybe have manipulated in some way that would cause the AI model to devolve or collapse. So researchers at the University of Chicago have created two AI models that will, given an image, change it in such a way that when it is input into an AI model, it's going to break that model. This is really useful for artists who don't want their work stolen and reappropriated, except this doesn't work. So they use cryptographic techniques to try to make this possible, but if you know the algorithm that was used, you can undo the perturbation that was applied. And so it's easy to detect these manipulations, and either you don't include them in your data or you undo these perturbations. Okay, so we can't poison the well. What else could we do? We could add an input filter. So maybe all requests to to generate an image of Mona Lisa are denied because we have a list of Mona Lisa's, her name and her other names she's used, and our filter can check against these names and say, hey, I'm not allowed to, provide an output for these names because someone told me I'm not allowed to. We could add an output filter. So maybe the AI model will create an image of Mona Lisa, but we have real images of Mona Lisa that we can check against in our filter. We can stop, we could create an error, we could say there was an error when creating this image. But in some sense, we have to feed the same monster that is threatening to tear down our house to keep it at bay. We have to hand over our names and our images, our likeness, our audio, our video, for it to not create images, audio, and video of us. I don't think these are feasible solutions. We could ban AI models entirely. However, they're open source models that no one controls. No single company, no single person has control over. So these models will still continue to exist no matter how hard you try to ban them. There are also First Amendment concerns with banning speech, right? Creating an image, creating a video is an expression of speech. So the ACLU, in fact, in Georgia is fighting for your constitutional right to free speech or your right to create a deepfake. So that doesn't work. We can't ban AI models. What if we tried to authenticate real content? So there's a standard called the content, it's called C2PA, the content something and provenance. I forget what it stands for, but essentially what it does is there's a cryptographic proof in the image from the moment it was taken on camera. So in your hardware, there's an algorithm that is applied to your image. And every time you move that image over onto your computer, onto social media, someone else reshares it, there's cryptographic proof that that image was taken by a camera and has not been manipulated. And you can validate that. What might be a problem with this approach where we have cameras? Yeah.
Do the deep fake and then you take a picture of it and that's what.
Sure, you could create a deepfake of a real image and then it might spread like wildfire, right? There's also this underlying assumption that if the content is not verified as being authentic, then it's inauthentic. And not everyone has access to expensive cameras to be able to say what I'm creating is real. What's happening to me in the real world is real. And so we don't want to cast doubt on the realness of content. So what we're left with then in terms of technical solutions is maybe we could try to detect deepfakes after the fact. But oftentimes it's too late and the harm has already occurred. a teenager has created a deepfake nude of their classmate. There's a deepfake of a politician saying something they never said, and maybe a war has started. So the takeaway here, and I hope you agree with me, is that technical solutions will not solve social problems. So what can we do? There's a lot we can do, but none of it is technical. Maybe, instead of relying on technical solutions, we can rely on social solutions and therefore legal solutions. We could apply pressure on model developers, on regulators, on policymakers, on the users of this technology. We could make it, unappealing to use a generative AI model to create a deepfake. Social norms are powerful, but they're not enough. By applying public pressure, maybe this persuades regulators to apply pressure on model developers as well and users of these models. So in fact, the FTC with Lina Khan is doing just that, at least for now. We'll find out on Tuesday what happens. So the mere act of threatening legal action, for example, by the FTC has dissuaded some companies from releasing models that might do something dangerous. We could also write laws that make model developers or end users legally liable for the harms that they may cause. So there's a difference between banning something and making you liable for something that you say, right? We can't ban things because we have our First Amendment right to free speech, but we could hold you liable if that speech ends up, causing harm to someone. And we're seeing laws like this being passed in California and in other states. And some of these laws are under discussion in Congress. There's been a lot of consensus, at least with respect to non-consensual intimate imagery that is generated by AI models. Where a lot of my work is focused on is educating policymakers and end users and software developers of the harms that the models that can create, or that can be created, the potential harms that can be created. But I also think it's really important to stop using generative AI models. We're feeding the machine that is harming us in so many different ways, or at least without knowing its limitations and harms. We can't go into this blind and say, this doesn't hurt anyone. It does. But you need to acknowledge that it does before you use it. And if you think the benefits outweigh the harms. I'll leave you with 2 book recommendations if you want to dive into this deeper. So the first one is called Blood in the Machine, The Origins of the Rebellion Against Tech. And this talks all about the Luddite Rebellion, I think the rebellion against tech during the Vietnam War in Silicon Valley in the 70s, and what we might be able to do today. Another book is called AI Snake Oil. It's by Arvind Narayan and Sayash Kapoor at Princeton, and it talks all about the ways that people say we could use AI to do wonderful, amazing things, but it's all just snake oil. We actually can't. So generative AI is reshaping society. The only thing we can do about it is fight. We need to play an active role in shaping the future that we want for our children and for future generations. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
You talked about not using AI, but sometimes when you just click on a website or you're using, how do you know whether you're using AI? So if I said, I'm going to do exactly what he said, I'm not using any more AI,
Yep.
How do I know how to do that?
Yeah, I think there's a distinction, which I didn't think I would have time to make, but there's a distinction between AI in general, which is used to predict things, so predict the next item you might want to purchase and recommend it to you, and generative AI, which is creating content that is not real. AI itself, I think, can be immensely helpful, like helping with cancer diagnoses, helping you buy your next shoe or something like that, right? So that's okay, but with generative AI, I think it's easier to know when you're using it to create something. But oftentimes it is built into our technology. So for example, with Gmail that we use here on campus, there's autofill. It's helpful, but is it also shaping how I write emails and shaping how I think? I don't know. The research is unclear on that for now. But it is incredibly hard to use things that don't have AI and increasingly hard to use things that don't have generative AI built in.
Do you think Section 230 then would have to be adjusted, right?
The Communications Decency Act?
Yeah, for like generative AI, right? Because right now you can create a model and you're not legally liable.
Well, I think that only,
Times would be,
yeah.
but other people wouldn't be, per se. If it causes harm?
I think Section 230 only applies for communications, and it depends on how, lawmakers and like the legal system thinks about models, like whether it's a communication platform. So like it stemmed from when, radio hosts would, they aren't allowed to say certain things, but platforms are allowed to let people say certain things on their platform. But that's different than creating something with generative AI. So,
I guess if the AI is doing an editorial function,
mhm,
right, which
right.
one could argue, but
Yeah.
it seems like then it would have to apply to those models.
Only if you're communicating that to other people. And so, for example, I could imagine Section 230 being changed to say, maybe you're not liable for any speech that a human created, but you are liable for speech that a machine created. In the back with the sweater, yep.
Repeat the question.
Okay.
We were talking about the difference between artificial intelligence and generative artificial intelligence, and I'm particularly interested in how generative and that distinction influences education. There's so many aspects of artificial intelligence that have been incorporated for time saving and equity measures in education.
Mm-hmm.
From things like electronic grade books to Canvas, blackboards, that kind of thing, that relies on digital technology in order to transfer information. And I'm wondering about efforts to support educational systems so that all the people involved, the educators, the support people, can understand better in order to guide this community, like the communities that they're
Mhm.
involved in. If we're talking about education as being a form of fighting. In the last decade, we were speaking of the digital natives. The students are the digital natives, and the teachers are learning from their students. Now, how can we help those who are responsible for guiding educational institutions to help educate and make choices that allow us to fight?
Mm-hmm. Ooh, that's a loaded question. So I think there's three parts to it. So the first one is, people are using technology every day in the classroom, and that technology can be an equalizer, right? But there's also AI that some of that technology is using on top of that. And now we have generative AI on top of that as well. And so technology itself is, sharing information between people and making it easier for students maybe to hand in homework and things like that. I think that's fine. It sort of speeds up something we're going to do anyways. AI on top of that is adding a prediction element. So, here is a student, and that student is, doing okay, but maybe based on what we know of students like that student from previous classes, maybe they're actually not doing okay, and they're going to fail this class, right? So that might be one example of where AI could help. But there are inbuilt biases in that, right? There's racial biases, gender biases, and we still haven't solved that problem today. And then coming to so we still haven't solved that problem, and now we're coming to generative AI. And in fact, we haven't even solved the problem of technology, because not everyone, even here, students who come to campus, we give them laptops, but they don't have laptops, right? And so that's a challenge in and of itself. And then now we've stepped, 2 steps forward, and we're with generative AI. What are efforts underway to help teachers and understand that? I don't do that work myself. I don't work with teachers. I am a teacher. I can tell you what I do in the classroom. I walk them through, how generative AI is being used and where I think it's appropriate and it's not. I honestly don't think anything I've talked about today is an appropriate use of generative AI. I think it's just being used to replace labor, to not pay humans, to automate things, and to create content that honestly is maybe not that great quality and sometimes harmful, right? Where I think it might be okay, so I'm in a computer science department, where I think it might be okay, for example, is creating code. It has been really useful to create code, and I can verify that code, and I know I can run the code and see whether or not it produces the output that I expect. I know that there's a lot of people at other universities, like at Carnegie Mellon and the University of Washington, who are working with teachers. So they're funded by the NSF, the National Science Foundation, for example, to develop initiatives to teach teachers about how to use generative AI, both as teachers themselves, and also help the students understand where it's okay and where it's not. in the back there.
If I'm using AI to create an image or create a design, how do I know that I own the image or who actually owns the image? And what happens if I infringe?
Infringe on copyright?
Copyright, correct. Or trademark.
Yeah. How often do you read the terms and conditions of software that you use? Yeah. So that unfortunately is a starting point. But that also means the onus is on you, right? All of this technology is shifting the onus on us as individuals away from the companies, right? Section 230 also puts the onus on individuals and not the platforms that share information. So unfortunately, you need to read the terms and conditions. There's no good way around it.
I'm a software developer and I've spent a lot of time playing with the Copilot. It's fascinating to hear you say that you depend on it to check code or write code, because it strikes me as a teacher, the ability to intuit that it actually wrote the right code makes it especially troublesome to rely on probabilistic generated code as something that you can use. I'm not saying never use a Phillips screwdriver, but there is a limit to every once in a while you have to know this is time to use a flathead if you're thinking of AI as a tool.
Yeah. So I use generative AI to write code. I do not let my students use generative AI to write code. So I think you need to first learn how to write code, and then you can try to automate some of that code writing, right? So I know what is an appropriate line of code, and I know how to test it. Students don't, and I tell them, I start off with examples where people have used generative AI to write code, and it comes up with fictitious libraries. So libraries are packages of code that exist on the internet, and someone can pull that package and use it so that they don't have to write that code. And there are malicious packages that people are injecting into generative AI models to then gain control of systems, for example. So you do need to be really, really careful, but it does save me some time.
I just kind of wanted to get your take on one aspect of the fight. One of the major issues in the negotiations between the Writers Guild and the Actors Equity concerned exactly this, is how do we control generative AI with respect to images and as well as content. I don't know, if you've been following that, but I would like to get your impressions on it.
Yeah, there's a lot. So there's a slide that I didn't cover because I didn't think I had time, but for example, there's a recent Tom Hanks movie where he consented to using generative AI to de-age him so that they didn't have to find another actor and it could be his authentic self, but also they didn't have to find another actor, right? So that is, questionable, but maybe okay. Another example is with the Writers Guild fight. I think Disney was scanning people's faces and bodies and essentially have them sign over the perpetual license to their likeness to reuse and to train generative AI models with, so that they didn't have to pay the actor again. So I think that is not okay, and I think they have some reasonable protections now. I'm not entirely sure what's in the contract. And then I think just yesterday, Robert Downey Jr. has put in his estate, so his will when he passes away, that his estate will fight against the use of generative AI of his likeness in perpetuity. So for those of you who are public figures and have an estate large enough to do that, that might be something you might want to consider. Did you have a question?
Me?
Yeah.
Elon Musk, where does he stand on the issue of generative AI?
Elon Musk, where does he stand on the issue?
I thought that he was warning against use of AI.
Elon Musk is mercurial. As of July, he's okay with it, I guess. But, yeah. Yeah, with the black shirt. Yeah.
So you said to not use generative AI, but then you said you use it because it's an efficiency. But couldn't others then justify in their own domain areas that it's efficient for them, they should use it, and then we're all using it?
Yeah.
Is
So.
that inconsistent, what you just said?
Yeah, so I was trying to provoke everyone when I said stop using it, but I have a disclaimer here. which is without knowing its limitations and harms. So the only place I use it is to write code, and I'm okay with copying code that other people might have written. I'm not okay with, for example, unfortunately, I had to do this today, but I used Obama's voice, right, to introduce myself at the beginning of this talk.
So then there's a lot of emphasis on educating users.
Yep. The users, but also the developers, right? I think the problem with generative AI is not that it's not useful per se, but that it's so general purpose that it can be used for anything. If you can use it for anything, then you don't really have a use case in mind. I think it's really important to ground all of this technology in a specific use case and not go around with a hammer trying to find nails. Up here.
Hi, I just had a question regarding your parsing of the use of probabilistic models generally when buying a pair of shoes versus this, and I just wanted to kind of hear why you make that distinction.
Yeah, so with a probabilistic model, you have a set of choices, and the question is, which of these choices do we think is the best fit for the customer, the user, or what is the best prediction of something, right? Like, for example, here's an image. Is it likely that this image depicts, someone with cancer in their body? So it's a yes or no, or which is the best choice, right? But it's grounded in reality. We're making a choice in something. But with generative AI, we're creating something that doesn't really exist. And so there's this detachment from reality. If you had, several months ago, if you asked generative AI to create an image of a person with their hands up in the air, it would depict people with 4 fingers or, all their fingers blended together. And so I think with AI models like, helping people find items or predict, whether someone has cancer or not, I think it's grounded in a use case. But with generative AI, it's like, how can we use it to create cool images and video? But are people really using it? Not really. You have to put in a lot of work to make something useful, like the video with Miley Cyrus, for example.
But when thinking about, just as a follow-up, the use of it for commercial purposes, reinforcing the moats that many of these businesses have. So just wondering why you've got this distinction between the two and the harms that are caused.
Yeah, I think the harms are unique. I mean, I'm not saying that predictive models don't have their own harms. They do. There's an incredible amount of harms. So like with recidivism prediction algorithms, they often predict that people from certain zip codes or of certain skin colors are more likely to recede to commit crimes again. And that may not be true. We don't know the future. We don't know that a person is going to change or not, right? So I agree that there are a lot of harms even with those algorithms, but I think there's a distinction between what they're used for. It's like creating content versus predicting the future.
So,
yeah. Hey.
So first of all, I work in strategic communications and content development, and I absolutely agree in terms of having a regulatory environment, protections, and all of that. I'm just wondering, where you say stop using generative AI, part of, being a communicator is using a new tool, the innovation, and I'm just wondering when you say stop using it, when new tools are introduced, you use it to find, new ways of doing things, better efficiency. That's part of being part of a progressive, innovative, dynamic society.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering in terms of your recommendation to stop using AI for how long
So I'm gonna point to the disclaimer again.
Okay.
So it depends on, so for example, with strategic communication, if you want to create, maybe there was an incident somewhere and you want to write up a letter about what happened. I think the University of Ohio, don't quote me on this, but some university, there was an incident on campus and they wrote up an apology letter, but there were factual errors in that apology letter. And so I think it lends us to become lazy and not fact check things or not look at what's happening. So that's one problem. Another problem is it takes away agency from us. What might be better is, say, having generative AI come up with possible ideas, and then you choose among those possible ideas and how to frame things. But even then, you're restricted, at least this is a philosophical argument that I believe, to what people have written in the past. Because generative AI is built on the past, right? And so I agree that you may not think like other people, and hearing other people's thoughts might help you be better. But there's this fundamental concept that it's grounded in the past, and it may not help us move forward. So it's okay if you use it, but if 100 people use it, you're all going to have the same idea, probably.
So I guess how is it different when you Google something
Yeah.
and get an I guess I'm curious in terms of the stop using
Yeah.
when part of dynamicism,
Right.
innovation is testing things out,
Mhm.
trying.
I'm not saying you shouldn't test things out, you shouldn't use it, but you should know what you're getting into. So the content that these models are trained on is content that someone has put their hard work into, their blood, sweat, and tears into, and they were never paid for it, right? If maybe you're using a model that someone consented to, was paid for, that's okay. I think that's perfectly fine. But it's just the way AI models are created today. There's no consent, no payment. There's a lot of theft, and that's why I'm saying you shouldn't use it. Maybe there are alternative, there are some avenues to explore, like Adobe, for example, with their Firefly model, they actually paid artists for their work that they trained their images on, and so that's what I've used sometimes. Another thing to note is Google gets updated frequently, right? If there's something new that happens, you will find it in the search results, hopefully. These models are often, again, stuck in the past unless they're updated often, but that's not the case, usually.
Thank you for your talk. It was wonderful, and it was very accessible, which I really appreciated.
Mhm.
I'm going to be honest, I'm sitting here in a little bit of fear because I think I've been an unknowingly consumer of deepfakes. So I guess I'd like to know from you, what do you think the prevalence is in our society of this, and thinking about shaping society? If I'm upset on Tuesday with the results of the election, can I blame deepfakes?
No. So again, it's only exacerbating an existing social problem, right? It's reinforcing, reifying our existing beliefs. There may be like a slight shift, 1% or 2 points here or there in either direction, but I think there's very little you can attribute it to, at least with respect to elections. There's a lot of real harm you can attribute it to, and you may be an unknowing consumer of this content. Unfortunately, A, it's not your fault. B, it's not in your control. It is the platform's fault, and they need to do a better job of this, and the model developer's fault. Yeah.
We have time for one more question.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. So I think we can probably all agree that AI is here to stay. There's good aspects of it. Generative AI is used to summarize what one human would take hours or days or weeks to do, or would take massive amounts of humans to do. And there, as you pointed out very well, there's bad uses of it. A lot of it seems to me, as you pointed out, comes down to education, but that's really foundational. So what is Swarthmore doing to educated students, not just in one classroom, your classroom, which I'm sure you're doing a good job of it, but on a broader scale to make sure that they come out as good citizens of the world and understand what's a good use, what's an appropriate use, what's not. We know that a lot of students are using it to create papers, which is obviously not. So how are they addressing this as a foundational issue for their students going forward to be good citizens of the world?
Yeah, that is a great question. I will say that this is my second year at Swarthmore, and in the department, we do have disclaimers about appropriate use and things like that. But to know what Swarthmore is doing, stay tuned for Swarthmore Forward, and I will direct that question to President Smith.
I knew that was coming.
All right, thank you, everyone.